You gotta have some guts to win your fantasy football leagues in 2022. I'm not saying you need to go absolutely crazy and draft the riskiest, highest upside player in every single round. But the more fantasy drafts I find myself in this season, I keep saying to myself, man, people need to stop drafting so scared. Yes, it's good practice in the early rounds of fantasy drafts to focus on players who have done it before, so people are repeating their expectations instead of exceeding their expectations. But people, there are players every single year that you just need to grow a spine and take the plunge. With that in mind, I'm Matt Savoca from Stokastic.com, and today we are bringing you 5 players who your gutless league mates won't draft, but you absolutely should in fantasy football this year. James Conner scored a lot of touchdowns for the Arizona Cardinals last year, 18 to be exact, which earned him a trip to the Pro Bowl and yet another contract from the Cardinals. But in a strange way, that touchdown total might be scaring people away from taking Conner at his 33rd overall ADP on Underdog. It's almost a Pavlovian response from the fantasy football community at this point. A player outperforms their touch-based expectations in the touchdown department, and you scream, regression. And then, of course, you fade the player the following season. It's that simple, right? But Conner's circumstance is unique. We know better in 2022. Volume is king in fantasy football, and Conner could improve in that regard from 2021 to 2022. Former Cardinal Chase Edmonds averaged 9.7 rushes and 4.4 targets per game last season. And if just a portion of that workload, say 50%, goes Conner's way after 16.1 opportunities last season, you've got a surefire bell cow running back on your hands in Arizona. Edmonds and Conner combined for over 25 half PPR fantasy points per game last season. And Conner, traditionally known as a mediocre pass catcher, was actually just fine in that regard last year. He had a 94% catch rate and averaged 10.1 yards per reception. And when he got the ball in his hands, he was as elusive as we've ever seen him. He ranked top 25 in evaded tackles per touch. And most importantly, the rest of the Cardinals' backfield is just a bunch of scrubs in 2022. I'm not expecting any of Darrell Williams, Eno Benjamin, or Keontae Ingram to make any sort of noise in the 2022 season, barring injury. And here's the final kicker. Conner had all those touchdowns. He didn't actually have all that many red zone touches last year. He was 16th in the NFL in red zone touches. That could actually hold steady from year to year. So if the team remains efficient in red zone opportunities, Conner could actually have a chance to match his touchdown totals from a season ago. And as we mentioned, the volume will be there in a way it wasn't last year. James Conner is a smash at ADP. The Jets have spent some serious NFL draft capital on the skill positions over the last 2 seasons. They are trying their best to surround quarterback Zach Wilson with some firepower. For most fantasy gamers, however, investing 4th-round draft capital into a running back who might see competition from a day 2 second-year player is simply too much to ask. But guys, how can I put this lightly? If you're scared about Michael Carter, then you don't deserve Breece Hall when he breaks out all over the place in 2022. Hall is an absolutely superb prospect coming out of Iowa State this year. He was drafted with the 4th pick of the 2nd round, a mini tier within the NFL draft that is starting to produce a ton of fantasy stars. Nick Chubb, T. Higgins, and Michael Pittman were all drafted in this top 5 2nd round range. I believe Hall is the next in line to outperform their NFL draft and fantasy draft based expectations this year. The athletic profile for Hall, perfect. He was an incredible contributor the moment he got onto the field in college and averaged 95 scrimmage yards per game over the course of his last 2 seasons. Combine that with a burst score and a speed score that Player Profiler ranks above the 95th percentile, and you get a collection of prospect metrics that most closely matches Jonathan Taylor. That's a pretty solid comparison. For me, I think the best comparison is actually Nick Chubb. Situationally, Chubb found himself in the same sort of backfield his rookie year. A crummy team, a quarterback in his rookie season, and still became a breakout player by midseason, finishing as a top 10 fantasy running back in 50% of his games played from week 8 on his rookie year. These hyper-elusive rookies like Chubb and Hall make an impact in year 1, and that's exactly what's going to happen in the Meadowlands for Gang Green. Michael Carter is a fine player. Breece Hall is a star. The Ravens are honestly still a mess at the running back position this year. Heading into 2021, that looked like a position of strength until Justice Hill, Gus Edwards, and J.K. Dobbins all tore up their knees in preseason. And what's worse, the process of getting any of them back on the field has proved more tumultuous than expected. but Dobbins is the one we need to have some conviction about heading into 2022. He continues to slip in average draft position as news coming out of Baltimore training camp about him is essentially non-existent. But I think we're reading the information wrong here. Dobbins still has a chance to play week 1. And the most actionable news out of the Baltimore backfield so far is that Gus Edwards is reportedly further behind in his rehab than Dobbins. This is actually huge. Dobbins has said on social media that he believes he'll be ready for week 1. And while we need to take that information with a huge grain of salt, that is incredibly positive news for a player who was hyper efficient in 2020. Dobbins finished as the RB20 or better in every single game he played in week 11 on his rookie season, posting top 5 numbers in almost every conceivable efficiency metric known to mankind. Evaded tackles per touch, yards per touch, true yards per carry, expected points added, you name it, he was elite. Your league mates will say, well, Lamar Jackson commands rushing attempts, especially near the goal line, but stop pretending that an efficient running back can't succeed within this Baltimore offense. During Jackson's 2019 MVP season, his starting running back, Mark Ingram, was near the league lead in touchdowns scored. And behind Dobbins and the aforementioned Edwards, scrubs like Mike Davis or Tyler Beatty are not taking away a ton of touches from a healthy Dobbins. Expect Dobbins to seize the Baltimore backfield sooner rather than later in a bounce-back season. The Kansas City Chiefs traded their star wide receiver Tyreek Hill to the Miami Dolphins this offseason, and that triggered a total revamping of the wide receiver room for the Chiefs in 2022. Out are players like the aforementioned Hill, Demarcus Robinson, and Byron Pringle, and in their place are the likes of Juju Smith-Schuster, rookie Sky Moore, who they drafted in the 2nd round, and veteran wideout Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And it's Valdes-Scantling who has surprisingly got the attention of exactly no one this offseason. Valdes-Scantling will be making significantly more money than Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster, or Mecole Hardman. And he has the inside track for the primary deep ball receiver in this prolific Kansas City offense. Your league mates are probably oversimplifying here, saying, didn't he already play with the MVP of the league the last 2 seasons? And yes, it's true that MVS had a difficult time catching on in Green Bay. Mahomes and Rodgers are very different quarterbacks. One in Rodgers relies on preciseness, predictability, and repeatability at the wide receiver position. The other relies on play extension and improvisation, and it's through that lens, I think we can see MVS having a monster year in 2022. Even on just 5 targets per game in Green Bay last year, MVS averaged 87 air yards per game, an air yards per target that was number 1 in the NFL. And when he did bring the ball down, he was making splash plays all over the field. He was top 5 in yards per reception, which just proves he doesn't even need massive volume to succeed in Kansas City. And if he does get a bump from that 5 targets per game we saw last year, watch out. So while your league mates shy away from a 3rd or 4th option wide receiver, just take him and watch him absolutely smash his 93rd overall ADP on Underdog. Speaking of Underdog Fantasy, we want to tell you about an awesome offer we have with Underdog Fantasy, the best place to play best ball fantasy football this season. You can see it on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, but if you use promo code Stokastic, Stokastic, not only can you get a bonus from Underdog, but we're going to kick in an extra bonus over at Stokastic as well. They will match your first deposit bonus up to $100. Why is this so important? It is free money, which is hard to come by in fantasy football, best ball, or sports betting. That'll give you up to 4 free entries to the Best Ball Mania 3 tournament, which gives you 3 opportunities to win $1 million, or 20 free entries to the $5 puppy tournament. The puppy free tournament is actually the 4th iteration of the $5 entry puppy tournament. It's that popular this year on Underdog Fantasy. And over at Stokastic, we're throwing in an extra bonus. We are giving you our best ball draft kit, our rankings for tournaments, for cash games, for all platforms that offer fantasy football. We got you covered, a $70 value, absolutely free when you use that promo code Stokastic, Stokastic. Finally, unless you've been under a rock for the last week, you've probably heard the news that Julio Jones is the newest member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And once again, Tom Brady has an absolutely absurd core of wide receivers as he marches for yet another Super Bowl ring at age 45. And while the news out of training camp for the Buccaneers hasn't been all positive, especially with Ryan Jensen, their center, going down for several months with a severe knee injury, this is still one of the most potent offenses in the NFL. Tom Brady was absolutely absolutely absurd last year, ranking best in the league in pass attempts, red zone pass attempts, passing yards, and passing touchdowns, and he was third in fantasy points per game. And maybe most importantly, he spread the ball around more than you might think. Looking at expected fantasy points per game, which is just an opportunity metric that combines rushes, passes, air yards, goal line, and red zone pass attempts into a scale we can all understand, fantasy points, the Buccaneers led the NFL in team expected fantasy points per game. They also led the NFL in expected fantasy points going to players outside their top 3 options, which means that Brady can support multiple pass catchers in a way that most quarterbacks simply cannot. So Julio Jones may not have a chance to match his typical targets on a per route basis, but on a per game basis, he actually could get close to his 2020 numbers with the Falcons pretty easily in Tampa Bay. His contract incentives also imply that 5 catches for 50 yards is very much in the weekly range of outcomes for this player. And if he averages that amount of volume, his spike weeks are going to be fantastic in 2022. He could easily approach the 13.4 fantasy points per game he averaged in 2020, his final season in Atlanta. Last year, both Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski earned more than 15 expected fantasy points per game, which is more than Julio Jones averaged in expected fantasy points in his last year in Atlanta. So similar to the argument about Valdes-Scantling in Kansas City, it is patently absurd to avoid players because they are tertiary options on elite offenses. The touchdowns are coming for Julio Jones, so even if his ADP rises to the single-digit rounds, I'm still taking my chances while my league mates are too scared. And that's it. There you have it. 5 players your gutless league mates are too scared to draft, but you absolutely should take the plunge. To recap, that's James Conner, that's Breece Hall, that's J.K. Dobbins, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Julio Jones. Check it right here for the Stokastic Fantasy Football channel. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell too so that you know when we're going live. Follow me on Twitter at Draftaholic. My name's Matt Savoca. Until next time, we'll see you guys later.